1st, 2022 meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. Our next item is adoption of the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. Mark Dunmeyer, Finance Director, please present this agenda item.
Thank you. So my staff report details the changes that, so the draft budget was presented at the last commission meeting, and there were some changes that were discussed at that meeting. They've been incorporated as well as a couple others. So I thought just briefly I would share those. There were 3 capital items, all in the water division. We increased the one of the grants for the water line transmission. We increased that a little over $45,000 up to $95,000. We added $50,000 for Zone 2 engineering study, and then we added $200,000 for additional water reservoir land purchase. That was that would be up at Fox Ridge. That would be our 5th reservoir. So those were added, and then we also made an operating budget change. We recognized that we had inadvertently not included $5,000 for metering expense in the meter power and protection department 73. So we did that. And then there was a statement in the both in the executive summary and the water key points and assumption about rate increases that had happened for the water rates, and we didn't have one of those right. They occurred in January and in October of 2021, so we corrected that. So as far as and at the very back of the budget document, there's a revisions document that highlights all these changes and their page numbers and where they're at in the document. So the schedules have all been updated accordingly with these changes. I did kind of go through at the last commission meeting the highlights of the budget. These changes don't really change those highlights. I could briefly run through those again if the commission would like, or just go straight to questions, whatever the commission would like to do.
If that would be solely for my benefit, I'd be happy to do that with you at another point in time, so as not to take everybody's time.
Prefer, sure.
Then discussion, questions?
I don't have any questions.
No questions? No questions? See the memo for the return to an action. I'm sorry, what's my action?
So the action, we'll be looking for a motion to approve the proposed water and light budget for fiscal year 22-23. That's the action we're looking for.
Yeah.
And the memo document is contained in your materials.
So moved.
The motion.
Second.
Second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. And the motion passes unanimously and the budget is adopted.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The next item is to request to set a public hearing for electric rates. Trina McManus, utility rate analyst, please present this agenda item.
Sure. Good evening. One of my other hats here at Water and Light is as a rate analyst. For about the last year and a half, I've been working with Jamie Phillips on the electric side and Mark Dunmeyer on the water side, relating to cost of service and rate designs. So moving forward, you'll see more of me related to public hearings on rates, presenting cost of service results, and also proposing rate designs. I'm here this evening to make the staff recommendation that the commission set a public hearing for July 19th, 2022 to establish or change electric rates and direct staff to advertise notice of the hearing. Early last year, Utility Financial Solutions did an electric cost of service analysis and recommended a 2-year rate design. The commission did approve year 1 of that rate design, and it went into effect on October 1st, 2021. Year one changes resulted in minor adjustments in different rate classes, but overall it was revenue neutral. And at the hearing in July, staff will review the electric cost of service results and discuss the rate design for year two. The commission will then have the opportunity to implement the recommended changes or continue the public hearing for further comment and deliberations. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for staff at this time?
Nope.
Then I'll entertain a motion to direct staff to advertise notice of the public hearing in English and Spanish for the date and time recommended.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, opposed, say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, and then our next item is a city service fee discussion. John, if you'll please present this agenda item.
So Tom, you want to start?
Sure, let me start. Last meeting, I believe it was, Commissioner Christensen, maybe it was the one before, Commissioner Christensen was concerned that we should discuss how to be good partners and move forward with the city on the city services fee discussion. So we attempted to do that. The mayor and I, stop me if this, met with another counselor and attempted to, and with staff eventually, attempted to figure out how Water and Light could help the city implement its city services fee that the council appears to want to enact. And the reason we're helping is that we have this billing system that we can bill. If the city had to start over and do their own billing system, it would be tremendously expensive for them. And the people would be paying for that expense would be the same people we serve because they're the citizens of Mingle by and large. There are a few people that aren't, but basically by being good partners, we can help them do this. The rub is that our billing system is complicated, and the city, and we agree. I think the commission agrees. The city wants to be sure that one, we don't cut off somebody's water or electricity for failing to pay a city services fee. The city agrees with that, and the commissions agree with that too. And second, that the city wants to do a low income rate to make it easier for some people to pay the city services fee. And those two things combined make it complicated. And so we've met with staff over months, and we have come up with a system that we believe will work. What has to happen next is the city has to, the way the system is taught, we've talked about it, the city council will enact a rate schedule of city services fees and how they're applied and how it's calculated. We will then take that to NISC, our billing provider, and talk to them about it. They will then prepare a contract proposal as to what would be done and how they can do it. And I think it's clear now that the city understands and agrees that we do not want to tweak our system. We want to make this be a plug-in to something we already have so that we don't end up with an unstable system or a problem that when we have an update of our system, their system will collapse or something. So the idea will be we would be able to come up with a through NISC, have a bill that will show basically what our charge for water is, what our charge for electricity is, what the city's charge for sewer is, what the city's charge for the city services fee, and then the city has been talking about also a stormwater fee, so that it should be easier to plug that in when that happens too. So if the city council agrees, then they will give us that that rate schedule, we will approach, our staff will talk to NASC. Our staff will then get the contract back from them and impress on them the urgency of doing this. The city needs to have this done. We'll get the contract back, and then it will take between 2 to 3 months probably. It's an estimate as to before we can actually implement it, because we're going to have to do a dry run to make sure it works, and they've got to do the programming. So that'll happen. In the meantime, our staff will work on an intergovernmental agreement that will talk about how to pay water and light back for these costs. And we're going to look at some of it will be easy, because NASC will charge. John, what's the word, John? That is called it's not a module.
It's a division.
A division. So they will have divisions that they get charged specifically for. It's allocated on the bill. But then there'll be some other charges too, and we're going to have to be talking to the city and negotiating that. For instance, how do we share the cost of mailing for that? There will also be issues, I believe, on our staff and their staff communicating what's happening here to the customers. There's a question about what right now. If anybody has a question about their sewer bill, they call us, because the phone number is on the bill for all of us. And as I understand it, there are certain criteria that if this has happened or that has happened, Water and Light knows how to make the adjustments. But if there are things other than that, then we send it to someone in the city, because it's their decision and their system. Water and Light staff, and I agree with them, has indicated to me that they feel strongly that they should not be fielding calls about the city services. That's really not something we're doing. It has nothing to do with our business, and that the city will need to have a phone number, and so people can talk directly or be referred to the city staff to talk about that. That's something that we're going to have to negotiate. Staff will, and the commission will make the final decision. But that's sort of where we're heading. We're trying to make this work. Bernie, is that a fair description?
I think that's a very fair description. I think the only underlying information that maybe isn't discussed is the why there's an urgency right now. And so the city of McMinnville and the city council voted to use $1.8 million of ARPA funding to backfill the operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And of course, those ARPA dollars, I think everybody here is very familiar with the variety of uses and things that they are intended to be used for. And that doesn't necessarily limit what they can be used for, but from a functionality standpoint, even though the council took this action, they also generally agreed that this was a poor action to take. It was a poor use of that $1.8 million. And so the rate structure that is going to be coming forward would be based on trying to recover those dollars so that those $1.8 million of ARPA funding can get pulled back out and used as really the federal government intended them to be used, which is into more, the variety of projects, infrastructure projects, et cetera, that can take place, and they won't just go away. And then we have a longer term challenge at the city of continued sustainable revenue. But this action and the urgency of this action is to kind of save those $1.8 million so the citizens of McMinnville can benefit from those ARPA dollars invested into things other than the operating budget, which is not a great use of those funds. And otherwise, I think, yes, we've had great open dialogues, really talked about the concerns that have come up and, what's easy to address or not easy. Certainly there's parts that are more complicated than others. And I think there's really a shared commitment to how to start from the get-go, having some equity steps in there, knowing that that will be imperfect, but also wanting to set up a methodology to be able to expand relief off the city service charge easily. And that's a large, that's an important goal because this charge is inherently inequitable in that it charges the same rates basically per household, and of course with no allowance for adjustments based on household income or things of that nature. So the intent would be right away with the unfolding to have some relief already built into that methodology, and but to leave the door open for additional relief down the road.
Yes, and you may recall, the commission authorized the general manager to send a letter saying that we objected to the franchise fee proposals. And this is not a franchise fee. It does not increase somebody's water rates or power rates. And we, I think it's fair to say that the commission, the information the commission has gotten is that we don't think the charter or we know about Oregon law would be an impediment to the city imposing this fee, unlike our position on the other stuff. And we focused on getting this accomplished because we think we can, and there may be still some disagreement between the city and the city council and water and light. Some people in the city council and water and light about franchise fees, but we don't have to deal with that now.
We don't. In fact, I think it's really important. I will say that this is also a little odd in that as the council worked to close that operating budget, basically made a request to give us this, I called it a Hail Mary earlier. I don't know if there's a better, more appropriate term for it, but an opportunity that within this very tight 5-6 week cycle, really, that we could try to replace these ARPA dollars right now, but then also with the sentiment of as we move into our more long-term revenue discussions, my commitment to that is to do a lot of bringing together the table, not just Water and Light and City of McMinnville, but accessing a number of the other work groups that we already have that are working together, like Stable Table, et cetera, and really trying to get a lot more collaborative in advance of proposals going before the council. So no, we don't need to, it's actually not, it's not at all a part of this discussion. We've stayed very focused on what we can achieve together and meet some of those shared goals.
Can I ask a couple
Sure.
questions or just bring up a couple things? I think the last time that, well, we talked about this several times as far as sort of working with the city to use the billing system to facilitate some additional city charges. And I think we talked about a lot of complex challenges associated with that. And some of them we touched upon, just it's one bill and people call one place, even though some things are at other places. But we also talked about some things associated with some equities like homeowners versus renters, and how do you assess those city fees when not everybody who's using water and is getting billed for that. I don't know what the discussions have been about the
I'd
city
be happy to
fee.
address that.
Yeah, I'd be
Sure.
curious to hear that.
So what we're preparing in the rate proposal will be coming forward. We'll have a couple different rate proposals, and city staff is definitely trying to make sure that they have a clear understanding of a clear enough understanding of how the billing system works, so that we're not asking for any type of I can't think of the word right now, but customization of the system. And then in terms of your direct question, yes, there is data that shows that people that live in multifamily residential structures tend to have a lower income level than people living in single family residential structures. And so the rate proposal that's going to be going before council has a couple of equity steps in them as a reduced rate based on based on the best understanding of how we could get of how we could determine that. And then a much greater reduced rate when and this is, I don't think it's too premature to talk about the method, the boat that's going to get us over the river here. To start, it would be working with the LIHEAP list. And so that would be, there would be a rate that would, and potentially customers, helping customers as well. So we are looking at the existing lists within that Water and Light already uses in order to give a rate reductions, and trying to mimic that so that there's 2 steps of reduction off of how the charge is proposed. And of course, the rate recommendation that's going to be going forward takes into account those reductions, and really and I'll double check that they take this into account as well, but also takes into account kind of a goal of increased number of reductions overall, right? Mm-hmm. So we know we're not going to successfully get relief to everybody through just LIHEAP and customers helping customers.
And Kathy, to help that answer, I think the city also realizes that Water and Light, they now realize, is not set up to qualify people as low income. So, right. So the ones that we already have where somebody else, whether it's YCAP on LIHEAP or St. Vincent's on helping customers, we think, we can't commit for NSC, but we think that our billing can reach out and kind of identify those people for the reduced rate. But in terms of other, I think the city understands that as they figure out other lists of people that should be benefited from this equity, they will have to provide those lists to us, because we're not going to be the ones who collect the data.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
sure.
Yeah.
So what about the scenario where the Water and Light is billed to like a single entity, but maybe there's 50 apart? Like, what if the building manager or the property owner is paying, and then there's 50 apartments there? Are all of those apartments, all the people that rent those apartments, are they all paying a city fee, and how do you get to those people,
so we discussed that a lot, and if you don't mind, I'll hand that over to you, Dan.
So what we looked at is using electric meter, because each individual apartment has an electric account.
Okay.
They don't necessarily have a water account.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then you get to everybody. So my other thought about this, when we're talking, I have been running internet billing systems for 25 years, and I've gone through a lot of evolutions of them. And so my question would be, while you're looking at how to modify or create additional modules or whatever you're going to do for maybe modifying the current Water and Light, McMinnville Water and Light bill that goes out, has there been a discussion or consideration for actually using the same billing system that you're using now, but the module would be to send a separate city bill out? Because the reason I asked this is kind of twofold. One of the reasons I asked it is because I know that we also had a lot of conversations about how does this happen with the city, and how do you support the city and do this, but how do people know that it's not their Water and Light rates going up? And when we're in the age of a lot of paperless billing and tons of people have auto credit cards, like they just see that more money is getting taken out of their account, and they're not looking at a bill to get explanation about why something happened. And I just wonder, from the billing software people, like, would it be almost easier to just design a module that did exactly what the city needed, as opposed to modifying what Water and Light really does? And I think there's a lot of discussion about that probably needs to be had, and maybe it has been had already.
Yeah, so there's going to be a separate module for this.
Mm-hmm.
So basically,
but it's like, just create a separate bill
Well,
that went on a separate
I
day.
guess the question is, we probably could have a separate bill, right?
It's not that much paper bill, it's not much paper involved.
You
It's-
basically duplicate all the accounts, so you double all your accounts.
So,
I mean, in the long run, it allows the city to use the billing system and do make whatever modifications and do whatever they want to do and treat customers however they want to treat them, and water and light separate. I'm
Right.
just,
No, I know.
I'm just throwing out an idea.
but
So,
I think that
anyway.
the problem is that you still have, you're still relying on something to trigger that. And that's going to be some type of water and light, whether it's the electric meter or the water.
No, but I think Kathy's question kind of is, I hadn't really thought of this. The idea would be NISC would generate, it would use our data field, but they would generate two bills, one for water and light services and one for city service.
That means you have double the number of bills now.
Yeah,
I think we were looking at minimal staff time. If you think of double accounts, now you're talking two bills. Every customer now has to pay two bills. That would be a second bill we would have to process, second bill we would have to now take payment for. So
Well, if it was
convenient
a
for the
second
customer.
bill, could the bill go to this, and could the payment go to the city directly to, that would be my thinking, is that
They
you.
would have to have a way to process it and apply it, right?
What's the
And-
percentage of auto pay customers you have, credit card and auto pay versus,
Paper check is still the number one. And credit card has caught up to be almost close. I don't have the accurate.
so
one,
about 50-50 then?
No.
Those are probably 50-50.
Because you have credit card, but then there's some other payment types too.
Like e-checks and.
Right. E-checks and.
Yes.
Yeah. Online bill pay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you have a form of each one of those, there could be some recurring. Those are starting to a little bit.
I think that going to what you were saying, part of the problem is if the city is using the system, the city now has to have access to the
Yeah,
system.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
going to be a real issue for us. Because now that means that the system is somewhere else.
Well,
instead of
unless the
being contained.
module was that, if it was a true separate module as far as the service interface, then they would just access their part of the
Right.
system and you would access your part of the system.
But then-
I don't know if it's a web-based system or it's is it
Which
web-based?
system is that?
The billing
The,
system.
the user portal, I mean, your service portal, is it
There's an
online?
online presence that a customer could.
Yeah, but
For,
it's
for
not-
you, for internally? Is it a web-based interface for the customer service people and
no,
billing
it's-
people, or
No.
it's a hard, it's,
I think the newer version is.
Yeah.
Cloud-based is the newer version, but
okay, just
no, that's
something
good.
to look
It's a
at.
great idea.
I mean, if- just for the people that have a bill sent out, it's another 50 cents.
Right,
Plus it's going to be, now you have
and then the
to,
relief is what I wonder about.
but now you have water and light posting bills and the city posting bills. So now you're doing it twice. So that means now you're going to have more staff time.
Mhm.
So that's going to be another
And
challenge.
it may be, I think we came up with in our discussion that at some point,
It may go that way.
the city may want to have their own system. Our system may not work for them and they may get their own billing system. But.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not in the budget right now.
No, so- no. but I mean,
And so, that's one of the other things. So we do have a bill redesign and that's pretty much done, right? Going live July 1. And it does on the bill separate the two.
And then have a contact for the city in
Right.
that. And so it says that the version that
Yeah.
I've seen, it shows these divisions
Right.
and the city is a division
yeah,
and has that direct to,
The thought was moving forward that too, the thought of the city service fee, I mean, that's what spurred the whole thing. But also there was thought put into stormwater down the road as well, that could be added.
to that division billing,
So a
right?
new
To
division.
that city side of the bill.
To that city side of the bill.
Yes.
Because one of the things that you're always going to struggle with is sewer is always based on water.
Mhm.
So separating sewer off from is going to be a challenge. Because that's how your building structure.
Micah, yeah.
Sorry, another thing to think of on the divisions is it's not necessarily another module, it's mainly to keep everything separate, because you're gonna want your financials to be isolated, and when stormwater comes along, it's gonna be its own division as well, just so everything can be isolated.
It still uses the same account number, correct?
Correct, so everything, you can have separate divisions, right, we already have that electric, water, sewer, they're all three different divisions. You would just do a service order or some type of way to add over, think of our as a device to the account, that would be a miscellaneous service charge.
And then if we had it separated, the customer would have to go to two places. They have to go to the city and to us, right?
If we were doing this two separate bills, yes. Well, it could still be here. You would just have, now, you would have two accounts, you would have to pay on not just one.
So Kathy, I think if it's okay with you, since you, I mean, we'll have a majority, we'll have a quorum here. We would just have staff go forward here, and if it's okay with you, I would like to kind of have a confirmation that, you know, if something comes up, I can get involved to try to solve it. The difficulty is that I can't talk to anybody else on the commission except for the mayor, because otherwise we're violating the public meeting law. So I can't, and you could certainly check in with staff about what's happening, but but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. So is it okay by consensus that I would continue in this role? I think and hope it's going to be reduced.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, Tom and I like each other, but we've
Yeah.
seen each other a lot this
Yeah.
time.
Yes. Be better to drink good wine or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd like you to know, Kathy, that staff has been very, very helpful. John Spence has been very patient with me, explaining things, and Sam and John have been very helpful too. So.
And I also don't see a reason we couldn't continue to have this on agendas as long as there's room to keep the
Yeah.
conversation going, and then we're in public meeting and we don't have to worry about any of those
Yeah.
things, and keep everybody up to date as we're.
And this way, Jody can watch the.
Right, I was gonna email her and tell her that, exactly.
Okay, any additional discussion on that? Okay, thank you. And do we have we don't need to go back into executive session afterwards. We do, but afterwards, okay. So right now, do you have any general manager comments?
I just have one. Scott this is his last meeting.
Oh,
He'll be retiring next Thursday.
wow.
So 30 years.
All right, Scott. We will miss you.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Wow.
Been a good career, great place to be.
I'll make it that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
That was it for me.
Okay, and commissioner comments. I know Chair Tankersley would like to talk about the Northwest Public Power Association.
It's
conference.
late. I'm happy to do it tonight, or I've got maybe 5 minutes, or we can do it another time if you want. Kathy?
I'm fine. I'm great to hear it, but
Okay,
it's up to you.
Okay. So real quickly, the NWPPA conference started with the Governmental Relations Committee, and it's really interesting. They have a list of resolutions that they put forward, and a lot of them carry forward from year to year. And occasionally they'll take one and drop it off because something has finally gotten solved. A couple examples. One would be there was a hydropower resolution where they supported zero emissions. Hydropower is a zero emission source, and also for grid reliability, balancing wind and solar. And they supported legislative changes to make licensing and relicensing less costly and more efficient. We remember we went through Grant County.
Yeah. So does everybody understand why hydro balances so well with wind and solar? Understand the logic behind that, why that works? Want me to explain
Yes,
that a little
please.
bit?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So wind and solar are considered intermittent resources, which means that like solar, no sun, no generation. No wind generation. So what happens is hydro is a resource that can be ramped very fast. And when I mean ramp, I mean it can go from zero generation to megawatts in just probably less than a minute. So it can balance the wind. If the wind's fluctuating or the solar's fluctuating, the hydro can go follow that along. Other resources like nuclear, coal, natural gas cannot follow that fast, cannot ramp and follow those intermittent resources that quickly. So that's why when the wind really started, it really started in the Northwest, and that's why so much wind ended up coming into the Northwest, was because we have such a large hydro fleet. I can't remember, is it like 75% of the generation in the Northwest is hydro? It's a pretty big number. And so that's why so much wind. I think at one point BPA had 6,000 megawatts of wind on the system there, and they're balancing authority, or their area where they have to balance loads with resources, because electricity cannot be stored. And so the stored energy in hydro is the fall of the water from the higher elevation to the lower elevation is how you get your power. And that spins the turbine. So basically that's why the Northwest is such a good marrying resource, or a good resource mix for wind. So like currently right now, we started the spring spill last week, really. So we're probably 2 months behind in the spring spill. So what ended up happening is BPA has now curtailed wind. They've gone to their oversupply management protocol. And when that happens, that means they have so much water coming down the system that they generate as much hydro as they can, and then they curtail other resources. So they normally they curtail the thermal plants first, which would be gas, coal, nuclear, and then they curtail the wind. And the reason they do that is because they have to pay the wind, or their protocol requires them to pay. Normally, if they're curtailing somebody, they just replace it with the hydro. But since wind gets attributes, renewable certificates or RECs when they generate, they're paying them a portion of that. So that's why the zero carbon and the whole concept of the hydro is as a zero carbon resource.
So thanks, John. They discussed that there may be some cybersecurity grants, Thad, under pending legislation. So I'm sure you're aware of it. They talked about there may be federal funds available for what they call hardening infrastructure, which making it less susceptible to damage, and maybe available through states. So, John, if you could check with Jody about that, please. And what the person said was that you should not wait for the funding notice to come out from the state or whatever, because basically be a very brief response window, and you actually have possibly have a chance now, because it's so vague, to figure out what we want and then try to influence what the funding notice will say, so it would fit as to what we need to harden our infrastructure. So I think it'd be worthwhile to talk to Joe.
And that was electric, right?
Yes. Yeah, this is NWPPA. They don't care about water.
I know. So,
apparently the Department of Energy has a website listing everything they have available, and it might be worthwhile for staff to look at that and see what's going on with that. There were state reports given. The terrifying one was California. They're facing a dire summer. The heat will increase demand. Supply chain issues are killing them on transformers and such, and the drought will mean there's less hydropower. So it's just a triple problem for them. That may even, so the less hydropower and the increased demand for electricity has them talking about rolling back efficiency standards on transformers, because apparently the more efficient transformers take this rare materials, and John can explain that are basically being used in more efficient transformers and in electric vehicles. So
you want me to explain what that is?
do you want to know, or is that too much in the weeds?
Is it a rare metal?
No, it's actually steel. So the steel in transformers is actually what they call grain oriented. So if you looked at the steel under a magnifying glass, all of the grains in the steel would be in alignment. And the reason we do that is because the eddy losses, the currents in the core, you want them going the same way. And that when they're randomized, the grains are randomized, that increases the losses of the transformer core. When they're going the same direction, lowers the losses.
And they always talk about one of the constraints, even we have extra power up here, there's not enough transmission to get it down. There's a limitation,
So-
a bottleneck. Yeah.
It's about 3,000 average megawatts is what they can ship south.
And so that hard to source this
It's only
steel with the,
made in two places, one plant in the US and one in China. That's it.
And it's being, there's other things that are sourcing it now, like you said, electric.
Motors
cars.
for electric cars.
So is the idea that there's less efficiency, but easier to get your hands on, sort of.
Increased production because the materials are less, are more available.
Yeah, if they use the less efficient steel, then the transformer has more waste, but they can get that steel. And then so it uses, so then it actually exacerbates their not enough power problem.
And then that will be higher cost for operating.
Yeah.
Over
That
time.
then will be passed on to the consumer.
Yeah, the people-
But at least they'll have
Yeah.
power.
Yeah, the people
Maybe.
from the Northwest tried not to talk about what tower costs up here.
Yeah.
With people in California.
And so for us, I think it's Chad here. Yeah, Chad's here. So we actually have our allocation transformers for 2023. So we don't have a transformer issue like some of the utilities.
So then someone from the Department of Energy Federal talked about hydro incentives in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, adding power to existing non-hydro power plants. So that might be something for us to look at. I know we've looked at it before.
You're thinking like we've looked at McGuire.
Yeah, McGuire, or even just putting a little turbine at the
Turbine.
bottom of the pot, at the bottom of the pipe
Yeah,
coming
we
out
looked at
of,
that
yeah.
before.
So that,
OSU is doing a research program on that right now, actually, of small hydroelectric installations.
okay,
I have a professor's name. if you're interested.
Because it's really tied to how much energy you can develop.
right, but yeah, but it may, if they have grants, it may pencil where it didn't before.
Where,
So-
we looked at it before.
Yeah, it did, yeah, right. They talked about they do a lot of training with NWPPA, and the training during the pandemic had to all be remote. And that was really useful, especially for small utilities who couldn't afford to have their electric superintendent, who was the only guy who understood electricity, go away. So now they're doing both things. They're offering things both remotely and in person. And they also can bring training to us. So I'm John Arden that. The keynote speaker was a fascinating guy who was a Ugandan refugee who it's a funny story. I won't tell the story, but basically developed a system where he has a company that collects the used soap bars from major hotels, and then they process them, and then they send them off to Africa and other third world countries, because soap is so important there to health for hygiene, because there's just a lot of soap around. So we talked about that, and he talked about providing pathways to diversity and how to do that in your organization. He said one of the suggestions I wrote down was to get the word out in educational institutions serving a diverse population, scholarships, job fairs like that, something we've talked about, but I think we should keep on it. A lot of talk about wildfire and sort of what they're doing down there. Some things that John is already doing, and some other things, wildfire protection. And then there was a whole thing that was just terrifying. It's about, and John can explain it, but it's about reliability and both an infrastructure and power supply. And it's a regional thing. And was it RAP? Western Regional.
WEC.
Well, there's WEC, and then there was another one too. But anyway, basically, the takeaway was we have to be very careful because California wants to kind of get involved with us and
Oh, you're talking about Cal ISO.
yeah, and
California
they're part of
Independent
it. They're
System
part of
Operator.
it, and so we have to be careful about that. Bonneville is doing the negotiation and watching out for us because we're Bonneville customers. We don't have to do it, and I think John is keeping an eye on it through
PPC.
PPC and those.
Power Council.
it's very complicated and they're very high stakes and,
This is the EIM, energy imbalance. model.
yes, right.
Yeah.
And then there was a program where somebody from SMUD, which is Sacramento's municipal utility,
It's like your name, that's not right.
talked about wildfire mitigation. And one of the things they talked about is in areas where it's high susceptibility, they have smart meters, so they can identify where there are problems really quickly and easily. They can, so that might be something we would look at if we have out in the areas where if we're set up to do it.
Right.
Yeah. And also they talked about, we talked a lot about electric vehicle adoption issues. And so I think if we start seeing a lot more of that in McMinnville, we ought to be talking to some California utilities about what they've discovered, because it's a whole other ballgame with them. And
Yeah, what it'll do is it'll drive our rate structures.
Yeah.
differently
Yeah,
too.
and what works and what doesn't.
Right, and the time of use is the one that people have been talking about.
Yeah, and then SMUD also talked again about the benefits of a diverse workforce and how that impacts serving diverse customers in a positive way. They talked about they look for barriers to diversity and they try to deal with it in the hiring and then also in those barriers in the continuing retention. And they also talked about being aware of generational differences. So that was it. That's sort of a summary of what it was. It was interesting to see what they're doing legislatively. That was really interesting. I didn't come back from the sessions like I have from APPA in the past, but it may just been what was going on this year. There was, there wasn't cybersecurity scaring the hell out of me, or there wasn't Mark Beauchamp. I think it was 15 or 20 years ago talking about cost of service and admitting that this isn't science. It's
Right.
there's a lot of fudge in here, which is important to know. But so anyway, that was it. I would encourage both of you to go to APPA or NWPPA next year.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think it is, you mentioned terrifying a couple times, and I think it is terrifying what's happening away from us in a lot of areas. And, I think if we get chances to talk more about disaster preparedness and those types of things, I think it's important to look outside and think about, how do you deal with a situation where you're healthy and you've done all the things to take care of yourself and you have all the resources, and somebody, 100 miles away, 1,000 miles away is at a significant loss and has no recovery options. And, at what point do you just you say, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that.
Right. Yeah. And
It's kind of interesting.
The mutual aid, there are huge mutual aid things. And a couple of conferences ago, maybe 5 years ago, they talked about it was after which hurricane was that?
Katrina or
One after Katrina. Anyway, it was
Sandy.
Yeah, they had learned some things about, they had a lot of problems on the first time they did, and the second time they had mutual aid, they had learned how to do it much better. The feds had learned how to coordinate it much better. They learned how to deal. Apparently, there are two ways that Scott, as your last act, you can explain this. There's some people work on wires hot and some don't. Is that what it is?
Hot stitching and rubber gloving.
Yeah, so some areas push a requirement, so we can work with hot sticks. Some states allow rubber glove. So there's lots of differences.
And so the problem is if somebody comes down whose jurisdiction does it one way and they're going to a state that do it the other way. So they just figured out that the crews would do what they need to do because it was a lot safer, and they made that possible when they were doing that. They had the first time they tried it, they had the state cops in one state they were driving through to get down there, stopping the line trucks and giving them tickets because they didn't have the right licenses for that state. So but then they got beyond that, and by learning from, what didn't work before, so.
Yeah, well, thank you for
Thank you.
bringing that back to us. Appreciate it.
I have two, does the Water and Light Commission do DEI training for staff and commissioners currently? Are there any other commissioner comments? No. Is it okay to close this meeting and then go into executive session?
I think the meeting stays open. We just
The
go
meeting
into- we
stays
just go
open?
into executive session and we'll just announce we're not coming back.
Okay, so there are financials and other information included in your packet that don't require any action. And so then with that, we're going to go into executive session. We won't have any other agenda items when we come out of executive session.
Okay.
So that liberates, I think, most everybody to go and enjoy their
I'm gonna
evening
go-
and get some dinner.
Right.
Is that accurate?
I'm going to read us into executive session. So we're going to have two additional items on executive session. Executive session pursuant to ORS 192-660 sub 2 sub F to consider information records that are exempt from public disclosure under ORS 192-355 sub 23 relating to identifying security measures, individual building and information processes. We're also going to have another executive session pursuant to 192-660 sub 2 sub F. Consider records exempt from public inspection under 192-5029 relating to confidential or privileged records. ORS 40.225 sub 1 sub B, attorney-client confidential communications. I don't think we have any media with us, but if we do, we're warned not to discuss anything that's in the executive session. And with that, we'll go ahead.
Start with
I-
Thad's report.
I think we'll start with that.